One thing for the fall, which is a new sermon series on the book of Daniel. And with that, we recognize, and I think all of us feel this, we're living in a world, we're living in our culture now, we're keeping up with the news and current events, and it feels like everything that we were raised to believe in our churches and by our parents is under full attack. That everything is being put away, and we're told to keep our faith in our head and in our church buildings, and don't bring it out into culture, and don't try to influence anything else or anybody else. It's okay for us to believe what we want to believe as long as we keep it to ourselves. That's what we're told. And the attacks and the insanity of all the things that are happening, where words don't mean what they used to mean, and people don't look like what they used to look like, and all the rest that's happening, that's all out there. And so Daniel, of all the books in the Bible, speaks to that kind of a situation. And it was written 600 years before Christ came. And what I want to show you today is that this is not a new thing. The things that we're seeing in our culture are not a new discovery. It's not anything that hasn't already been recycled a million times before. And we're going to look at that together as we kind of build our foundation before we kind of get into the whole series. There are two competing worldviews that are out there as far as we're concerned. And here they are. There's a Christian worldview, and it looks like this. That God made humankind in His image, as we see in the book of Genesis. That truth is revealed to us from God alone. And ultimately that we take those biblical principles, and that tells us what morality should be like. What is good, what is evil, what is right, what is wrong, what is holy, what is wicked. We learn all that because we believe the Bible is God's revealed word to us. And so that's our view of the world. There's a second view out there called secular humanism. Secular humanism means that they think that humans created the idea of God, or gods, whatever they might be, because we needed a safety blanket. We needed to believe that there's somebody out there that cares about us, that there's some God out there that's somehow in charge of everything and makes us feel good whenever life is hard. And so they believe it's just a projection, that we need somebody, we need a father figure, and so we made him up. And because they think that's silly, they say actually humans should decide what's true and what's good and what's right, because there is no such thing as God. And therefore, changing human whims will decide what's good and moral and evil. That's what it is. So you have two radically different views of the world. Either God is real and He has spoken to us and He shows us what life is about, or there is no God, therefore we get to be gods, or we get to pretend we are, even though we didn't make ourselves or this universe. We get to pretend we're gods and we can make up what we want to. That's really how it divides. There's smaller variations within that, but that's pretty much it. And this is not a new thing. Where did this whole idea of secular humanism start? Well, I want you to go all the way back with me to the beginning, to Genesis chapter 3. God has created the world in 6 days. He's got this incredible creation. He puts Adam and Eve in the garden. And right after they're there with this perfect friendship with God, here's what happens. It says, "Now the serpent was more cunning than any other animal in the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, 'Has God really said?'" There's your first questioning of truth. God is true. God has spoken. He told Adam and Eve what to do. And Satan comes in and says, "Has God really said?" And he questions God's character, God's honesty, God's trustworthiness. And did He really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? Which is not what God said, and Satan knew that. And the woman replies back to him and says, "From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said you shall not eat from it or even touch it or you'll die." And Eve is kind of elaborating on what God said there. And Satan goes on. And now he's going to directly challenge it. First he just kind of questions it. Now he's going to directly challenge it. And he says to her, "You certainly shall not die," which is an absolute lie. He's the father of lies. He says, God knows on the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll have enlightenment. And you will become like God. Man, he is dangling the temptation there. Why would you want to settle for just being merely human when you can be like God and you can know everything God knows? And he dangles that temptation in front of her. And as we know, she and Adam both fall for that. So the first liar, and it's interesting to remember this, Satan in the Bible was the angel of light. He was closest to God, but he had pride. He aspired for the very thing that he's telling Eve she can have too. He says, "I wanted to be God." And God had to banish him from heaven. And now because he's failed, he wants to take everybody else with him in failure. There are people like that when they try to get something that doesn't work for them, they'll try to get other people to fall for it too so they can share the misery of failure together. And that's what Satan does. He's the father of lies. And so he challenges her with this idea, two things. One, did God really say? And the second one, you can be your own God. Those two things, this challenge and this assertion, both go as a ripple effect through all of human history. They do. Let's go just a few more chapters ahead into Genesis chapter 6. Before I say that, here's the pattern. We're going to see this 3 times. Humanity ends up falling for this lie from Satan. God has to punish them, put them out of the garden in order to save their lives. And he promises, as I do that, I'm going to promise you that a future Savior is going to come and provide deliverance that you need. Now go to Genesis 6. This is the story of Noah's flood. The Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent and the thoughts of his hearts was only evil continually. So because Adam and Eve fall into sin, everybody who's born after them is born with this sin nature, including us. And so these people are there, and it's just God says, I made this world to be beautiful and perfect and have people that would love me and be friends with me, and this is what I have now. And it says the Lord was sorry that he had made mankind on the earth. He was grieved in his heart, and he said, I'm going to wipe out mankind that I've created from the face of the earth. I'm going to wipe it out. But, once again, if you know the story of Noah's Ark, we see that they fell for a lie from Satan. God had to punish them by destroying the earth with the flood, but then he not only does that, but he has Noah and his family build an ark so they can be a remnant, a faithful remnant, to be delivered, to keep on this promise of a future Savior to come save all of us. And then another time, Genesis 11. We're still in the first few chapters of the Bible here. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. It says, all the earth used the same language and the same words. And it came about as they journeyed east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar. You're going to see that word again later on. It's the place where Babylon is. And they settled there. And then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks, and we'll fire them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They're going to start building something. And here's what comes behind that in their thought process. They say to themselves, come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower, it's called a ziggurat, that would reach all the way up into heaven, this spiraling staircase, and let's make a name for ourselves. Do you hear what's behind that? We want to reach to the heavens. We want to be like God. They're falling for the same thing that Adam and Eve were tempted with. We want to be like God. We want to reach up into heaven where God is and be like God. Otherwise, we're going to be scattered all over the place. And so God has to respond to that one too. Next verse. He says this, the Lord comes down to see the city and the tower which the people had built, and the Lord said, behold, they're one people, they have the same language. This is what they've started to do. Now nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us, meaning Father, Son, Holy Spirit, let us go down there, and we'll confuse their language so that they will not understand one another. And so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. Once again, here's the pattern. They fall for this lie from Satan that they can be like God. God has to punish them in order to save them, and he confuses their language and scatters them all over the earth. Folks, we've only gone through the first 11 chapters of the Bible, and you see a pattern 3 times. You can't trust God. You can be like God, though. Did God really say you can be God? That's what Satan does to destroy everything God tries to make in the first 11 chapters of the Bible. That's it. So what we see in our culture today, when you watch the news, this is not a new thing. This is just another interpretation, another variation of what started before, where humans decide to redefine reality, make words mean something they didn't mean before, make up their own truth and say, I want to be this or I want to be this. This is not a new thing. This is, did God really say? You can be like God. It's the same story again. Every single crazy thing that we've ever devised is a direct descendant of Satan's original lie. So if you can keep those 2 things in there, next time you hear anything that sounds weird, strange, odd, awkward, evil, I want you to think these 2 thoughts in your head. This is Satan working. Did God really say, you can be like God? That's what people are doing. That's all it is. What we see today, in today's headlines, started in Genesis chapter 3. It's the same thing recycled over and over. So we're going to step into Daniel, because Daniel was a young man with some friends of his who was brought out of the world he grew up in with his faith as a teenage boy. And he ends up getting deported to a new place to live in a new culture, new land, new foods, new language, new education, everything. Can he hold on to what God has revealed to him in the first 13 years of his life as a young man who was raised by his family? Can he hold on to that faith? Can he still stand for what he knows is revealed truth from God? Can he do that in the midst of utter wickedness all around him? And he does. And his friends do too. And it's a fascinating study. We need to see this. We need to learn how did they do this and what courage and boldness it took for them to say, I don't have to fall for this. Did God really say, and I can be like God? Nonsense, because it is nonsense. I can actually believe the real thing. And so here we go with Daniel chapter 1. It's going to be a fun little time together. We're going to get just a little bit started today, and then we're going to finish up with the Lord's Supper, and we have a wonderful presentation from our team that's back from Africa to share with us about the 250 kids that they saw come to Jesus with that incredible mission trip. So here we go, Genesis chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he besieged it. What's going on here in this story? We always want to understand as we start a new series, we jump into a book in the Bible, what's happening in that particular time and culture so we understand what's going on there. So this book, written by Daniel, and it goes about time 605 BC, all the way back about 70 years beyond that. And so it is a story of Jerusalem being ransacked and defeated by the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, and then they get deported, many of them, to go live in Babylon. Daniel and his friends are going to be some of the people that get taken back with that. And this is a story of God having to, once again, just like he did in Genesis, he's got to punish his people in order to bring them to repentance so that they want him again. That's what he has to do with us all the time. And he does that with them too. Why does he allow them to be defeated? Well, let's look at what happens. Isaiah and Jeremiah, two of the major prophets in the Old Testament, describe what it was like for the Israelite people when this was happening. Isaiah starts a 66-chapter book with this. O sinful nation, people weighed down with guilt, offspring of evildoers, sons who act corruptly. They have abandoned the Lord. They have despised the Holy One of Israel. They have turned away from him. Where will you be stricken again? Are you to continue in your rebellion? Your entire head is sick and your entire heart is faint. He describes this nation as a people who have rejected God, gone after idolatry, not wanting to live up to their end of the covenant with God at all. Another one, a little further along in Isaiah chapter 24, he says, the earth will be completely laid waste, completely plundered, meaning somebody's going to come and conquer you. The Lord has spoken this word, meaning God's going to let this happen. The earth will dry up and crumble away. The mainland will dry out and crumble away. The exalted of the people of the earth will dwindle. The earth is defiled by these new inhabitants, for they have violated laws. They've altered God's statutes, and they've broken the everlasting covenant that God made that said, if you will obey me and love me and serve me, I will bless you. Therefore, a curse will devour the earth, and those who live in it will suffer for their guilt. This is a promise again. This is what you have coming to you. Let me show you some more notes here. So God's people have been warned for decades by these major prophets, Isaiah, and we're going to see Jeremiah in a moment, and yet the people wouldn't listen. Do you know what they wanted? They wanted secular humanism. They wanted, did God really say, we can be our own gods? They followed after every other god out there except the true God, the one who had given them the promised land, that incredible agricultural paradise that they had. Even though he'd given them all of that and his law and loved them, they said, we don't want you. We want somebody else's God. They chose secular humanism. We're going to go after something else besides you. It was incredibly pathetic what they chose to do. Here comes Isaiah, or Jeremiah 34, the Lord rebukes them there, that they had ignored the Sabbath day of rest. They weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and because they wouldn't do that, he had to give them 70 years of captivity in Babylon so he could get the Sabbath rest back for the land, because they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. Every 7 years, they're supposed to give the land a break. They're supposed to free prisoners and all those things. They didn't do it. They'd given up everything God had. This little quote here comes from a famous Puritan. When I was a freshman in college, I had a chance to take a class, and it was fascinating. This was written in 1630, almost 400 years ago. Okay? This is a 400-year-old document you're about to read on the screen with me. Jonathan Winthrop was a man's name. He was going to be the governor. He was kind of a pastor, a minister of a group of Puritans coming from England over to what was going to be called America. And he wrote a challenge for them while they're still in the boat. They haven't even reached the shore yet, but they're on the boat, and he wants to get them to understand why we're coming to this new country, why we're going to start this new experiment, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as they called it. And he does this long message. And in it, he talks about we're going to practice Christian truth and principles. We're going to worship God. We're going to treat each other with fairness and integrity and honesty. We're all going to pull together and do this. And then at the end of it, he says this: we must consider that we shall be as a city on a hill. Now, he's quoting from Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus says we're supposed to be a city on a hill where you don't hide your light under a lampshade, but we're supposed to be salt and light, and everybody can see us. He says we're going to do a social experiment. We're coming from England over to this new continent, America. We're going to start a new community that's going to be based on Christian truth and principles. And we want the whole world to be able to look at us and say, that's what it's like when Christian people live the Christian life. That's what his idea was. We're going to show the world what it looks like when Christian people do it. Basically, Israel failed in the Old Testament, so we're going to show them what it can look like. And he goes on, he says, the eyes of all people are upon us. The whole world is watching this experiment. So if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work that we've undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his pleasant help from us, we will be made a story and a byword throughout the world. We will be opening the mouths of our enemies to speak evil of the ways of God and all those who profess God. He basically is saying, if we do this right, everybody will say that's what it looks like when people honor God. And if we fail, they're going to be scorning us and scorning God. Almost 400 years ago, up in Massachusetts Bay Colony, if you were to travel up to that part of our country today, to New England area, you would find whole bunches of very famous colleges, universities. They're called the Ivy League schools. Harvard, Yale, Brown, a whole bunch of those. They were almost all started to train pastors because the people that came to our country and got started over there in the 13 colonies, they believed in their faith. They believed in making this place, as part of this big experiment, a place where God could rule, a place where this would be a place God could bless because our people would honor God. They're trying to reduplicate what could have happened in the Old Testament. And if you went to those schools today, we know what you would find is you would find secular humanism. Did God really say, you can be your own God? That's what they all teach now. They don't teach anybody the Christian view anymore. You would also notice something else. If you traveled, I have a pastor friend who works in Baltimore, Maryland, right up in the same part of the country. Baltimore is a city of about 3 million people, almost identical size to San Antonio. And my friend said the largest church in their entire city of 3 million people, are you ready for this? The largest church has 250 people. That's it. We have about 400 chairs just in this room right now. Just for comparison, the largest church in a city of 3 million only has 250 people. It's like Christianity is just a vapor, it's just a whisper, it's a long forgotten memory in that part of our country to see that. And so as we look at this, we recognize we have a part to play in this too. What Jonathan Winthrop challenged those people with is, if we want to offer people something other than secular humanism, we had better show them what Christianity really looks like. Let's really be Christian. Let's really live out our faith. Let's get involved in our communities. Let's get involved in leadership in all kinds of ways. And let's show them who Jesus is. Let's show them why the Christian view is superior, because it's God's revealed truth of who he is and his love and his plan for us. And if we do that well, as that man said 400 years ago, then we get to be a city on a hill and draw people to God. But if we don't, we're a scorn and a mocking. And we make God look bad and we make ourselves look bad. And so we have to be honest and say a lot of the blame for the situation we find our world in and our country in and our state and our city, when you look at all that, it's our fault. As Christians, we have not taken a big enough stand. We have not lived out our faith in a way that people say, oh, that's what it looks like when a person loves God. That's what it looks like when a person serves others and sacrifices their life for other people. They haven't seen that. They've seen us stay inside our churches and do our thing, keeping our faith inside our head and not really bothering anybody. And because of that, we're ineffective. We don't make a difference. And that's our whole big issue as Christians. We have got to be people who live it out for real, so people say, oh, I would love to have the life you have. Tell me about your faith. Tell me about your God, because I don't like my life, but your life looks really exciting, and I'm enticed by it. What can I learn? And we can offer them something different than, did God really say, and you can be your own God? We have to own that. That's a big part of our problem. Let's jump back in to Daniel. I'm going to get done here sometime today, I promise. And so here we are. The Lord handed over Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, over to the king of Babylon. When God hands him over, I want you to see this. Israel didn't lose this battle. God gave it to him. He said, I'm going to let you lose. I'm going to hand you over to a foreign invader because you have got to be punished. You need to feel the results of your choices, the consequences of your unbelief. You want idolatry? I'm going to send you to Babylon. They specialize in idolatry. I'll send you the most wicked place I can think of. You want to go have wickedness? You can have all you want. And God gives them what they ask for. Paul will say the same thing in Romans chapter 1, that God's way of dealing with us is, if you don't want me, if you want to live that, did God really say, and I can be my own God life? He says, I will turn you over to that. You read Romans chapter 1. It's exactly the language Paul uses to describe it. He says, God turned them over to their desires. And if you read Romans chapter 1, you think you're reading tonight's headlines, because what he describes is exactly what's going on now. And it was happening 2,000 years ago. Once again, this is all just recycled. It's the same old lie over and over again that people keep falling for. But he hands him over and gets it out of there. That's what they wanted. That's what they're going to get. Then it says he's going to take him to a different place. Along with some of the vessels of the house of God, he brought them to the land, and he brought these vessels in the treasury. So they go into the temple, and they take the vessels that they would have used for the sacrifices to God. There would have been all kinds of gold and silver and implements and things. And that's what you did. If you're a conquering king, you took the other person's things that their God would be worshipped with, and you brought them back to your place, to your treasury room, and it was your way of saying, ha, 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 my God's better than your God. I beat you. One scholar said that this choice of them to take these holy relics and take them back to their country is the inciting incident that makes the book of Daniel necessary. That God will not stand to be mocked. He allows his people to be taken captive, but he's not going to be mocked by some little puny earthly king who thinks he can take something back that's not even his. And because of that, there's another part in Daniel where you've heard the expression, the writing on the wall. We're going to learn about those same relics are going to get brought out again later on, and somebody's going to have a party with them, and God's going to cut them down completely. They're going to be gone because they're mocking God by using these implements. Next thing it goes on to say, he brought them to the land of Shinar. And this is a word that is used to describe Babylon. It's used in Zechariah to describe the place where wickedness goes. It's where the Tower of Babel was built. It's a place of rejection and idolatry, a place where faith is not allowed in God. It's the place you want. It's the worst possible description you can find of a place that says this is where evil lives and resides. And that's where it's a place hostile to faith. God's not going to be mocked. Now, in the last couple of years, we've done a couple of studies of different Bible characters together. We looked at Jonah, the prophet who didn't want to be a prophet. Now, and he wasn't a good example, obviously, but we looked at Ruth, we looked at Esther, we looked at Joseph. And in all these biblical characters, we saw a common theme that they were faithful to live out their faith no matter how difficult the circumstances were and what bad things happened to them. And we also saw that behind their story, it wasn't just about them, it was about the fact that God was sovereign and faithful to work through all the difficulties and hardships of their life to put them in just the right place to bring about just the right result that God knew he wanted to produce. So you have to be faithful, but God also is always doing his work that you can't always see underneath, and he's getting you ready to the place you're supposed to be. That's going to be Daniel's story too. Everything looks completely out of control. He's lost, he's gone, nothing good is going to happen from here, but here comes God, and he's going to work through this whole book, and we're going to see that together. This whole thing. Now there's going to be a little more description here. This is our last verse for today. The king told Ashpenaz, who was the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel. So as they've conquered them now, he says, now I want you to go find these best and brightest that they have in this country, including some of the royal family, some of the nobles, youth in whom there was no impairment, and they were good looking, okay? He is doing what often would happen. You conquer another country, you get all of their smartest people, their nobility, the people that have been raised with culture, with understanding, with good people skills, and you say, now you're going to come work for me, or I can just chop off your head. What's your choice? I'll come work for you. Okay, that's what they do. And so he's going to bring in these young, smart people from the place he's just captured in Israel and say, you're going to come to Babylon, you're going to work for me, you're going to be government officials for me, and that's how he's going to take care of it. Another thing it comes down, he says they're suitable for instruction in every kind of expertise. They're endowed with understanding, discerning knowledge. They have the ability to serve. So these are people with great potential. And what you don't understand is they're between the age, scholars say, between 12 and probably 17. They are junior high and high school boys. I spent 6 years teaching middle school. The idea that you would see that much potential in junior high people is kind of surprising, because you just don't know what they're going to turn out like. Are they going to be in prison? Or are they going to be president? You don't know, one or the other. But these young men have such potential. They've been raised well. And the other thing we don't know is, in the Jewish faith, because they've been raised in their homes, hopefully, they've been taught the Old Testament law. By the time they're 13, they have their bar mitzvah ceremony, so they're a son of the law. They are going to now have to survive on their faith with what they've learned as young boys in their homes and teenagers, because they're not going to have access to the Old Testament anymore. They will not see that again. They don't get to take that with them in their backpack when they go. There's going to be a whole new world for them to learn. And could they survive? If you thought about that, if you could take your whole adult life and base everything you know about your faith on what you knew as a 15-year-old, how would you have turned out? Whatever faith you had at the age of 15, that's all you had to carry on to the rest of your life. What was your faith like when you were 15? Or 12, or 13. I didn't get saved till I was 10. I was off to a slow start. Is youth ministry important? Is children's ministry important? Absolutely. We are laying foundations in our church for these people. We're going to baptize a few more in a few more weeks. This is so pivotal that we teach our children these things. And so one more thing I want you to see. Let's go to the next slide. he ordered Ashpenaz to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. If you remember, there is a famous Old Testament character named Abraham. Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees. What God has done is he's taking his nation that was started by Abraham way back in Genesis 12, and he's brought Abraham out of that land of Ur to do that, to come to a new nation, and now he's sending them all the way back to square one. You rejected me, you didn't want me, we're going to go back and try this again. Let's go back to first base. They're getting taken back there. But they're going to now learn, these young men are going to learn a new literature. They're not going to be reading Old Testament anymore. A new language. They won't be doing Hebrew anymore. And they're going to be educated for 3 years. It's almost like they're going to college, even though they're younger. They're going to get a whole new everything. It's going to try to wipe it all out. Everything they thought they knew, they're going to try to deprogram them and brainwash them to believe something else, which is, did God really say? And you can be your own God. We're going to introduce you to secular humanism. We're going to show you what it's like to have a different God than the God you thought you used to have. And so that's going to be their challenge. And these guys are going to have to live through this. And as we look through the book of Daniel, we'll watch how they choose to fight against that, starting even next week. The best and the brightest minds are now going to be working through this. America did the same thing with Germany when we won. During the war, we took their best scientists and we brought them over to help us develop rockets so that we could have superiority when it came to military power. You get the best and brightest of people, you put them to work for you. Now, among these, I want to give you their names. It says they assigned new names to these boys. Talk about getting deprogrammed. Look what these names mean. Daniel, on the next slide, Daniel's name means God is my judge. Can we click ahead? There we go. And they're going to change his name to say Belteshazzar, which is Bel's prince, the chief god. He used to say, God, Yahweh, is my judge, and God will judge my life. And now they're going to change his name to say, you're now going to be the favored son of Baal, our God, the chief god. That's pretty insulting. His friend Hananiah, his name was the one Jehovah favors. God looks upon him and smiles. They're going to change his name to, you are now inspired by our sun God that we worship in our culture. Mishael, who compares to God? His parents named that. Always remember, there's no one that compares to God. He's all there is. And they're going to change his name that he's going to now be the one who worships the earth God. Azariah, the one that Jehovah helps, is going to be changed to the servant of shining fire God, because the Babylonians worshipped the sun, the earth, and fire. And of course, Baal was their chief god. And so they're trying to completely say, you don't get your, quote, Christian name anymore, your Jewish name anymore. Now you're going to be given a new name. We're going to try to completely reprogram your brain, your thinking, your mind, everything. You're going to become ours. You're going to forget everything about who you were. It's the ultimate mind brainwashing that they're going to attempt to do. And as we look through the book of Daniel together, we're going to find out that these boys say, no, we're not going to we'll get in a fiery furnace before we bow down to your God. No, we're not going to eat your food. No, you can put me in a lion's den. At the age of 80, Daniel will later say in his older age, I'm not stopping who I am, and I'm not going to stop worshiping my God, because I know who my God is. I know who I am. I know my name, and I will not bow to all this silliness. That's the kind of courage these boys had. We're going to learn a lot of great things from them together as we walk through this. So here's a final little chart for you to see. This is what cultural assimilation looks like. You get a new location. I'm going to move you from here to here. You're going to get a new culture. You're going to learn everything different. A new education, a new language and literature, new food, even a new name. Where does cultural assimilation happen for us? Think about this. For most of us, and the way we live our life, the way we raise our children and grandchildren, it looks like this. We come to church on a Sunday or Saturday night. We spend about an hour, maybe two, if we do Sunday school too. We may maybe do a Bible study during the week. We may volunteer a little bit, but you add it all up and it may come out to about 4 or 5 hours. And the rest of the week, you go to work in a job that's run by the principles of secular humanism. You run to a school that is infiltrated with that same system, involved in sports leagues and ballet and all the other things. And it's not just so much what's always being taught at the top-down level, it's also the way everybody else has been raised. All of their parents have taught them these things. And so it's not just that your child or grandchild's going to school. Maybe the teacher doesn't teach it, but every other kid in the school believes it. And now they're the only one. They're the little Daniel or Daniela in their school. Do you see how this works? But to fight against 80 hours of that a week, we come to church on Sunday for a few hours. Do you see how successful that's going to be? If all we offer is let's go to church for a little bit, and we don't do anything else during the rest of the week, and it's not a part of our life, it's not a part of our family discussions and our prayer time and our how we live and having great conversations about why we believe what we believe, we don't do that all the time with our children, we lose them. It's why when children go away to college, so many of them come back as an atheist, because they've been baptized in secular humanism somewhere else, and all the other cool people are doing it, and mom and dad and grandma and grandpa look like old fuddy-dudds who don't understand anything. This is our problem. This is our struggle. We not only have to live out our faith, we've got to disciple our children and our grandchildren, make sure that this gets passed down, that this is what is true. This is what is best. And I'll put Christianity up against anything any day. You want purity and wholesomeness and holiness and goodness and righteousness? Oh, man, that sounds so good. Well, that's who we are. That's who we're supposed to be. And you want failure and diseases and addictions and all the rest that comes, that's what secular humanism will bring you to. There's nothing about it that's ever going to work. It might work a little while, but ultimately it kills you. We offer so much more